Yes, I will be attending your wedding, and I will be bringing 0 guests. Someday I'll have a hot date. Oh, greetings, my friends, and welcome back to Stark Raving. I am your host, Lord Stark. Now, much has happened since last we met. The Brotherhood Without Banners has been so impressed with my work that they've given me my own cave to defend, far away from all of theirs. Let's check in with the latest Westeros gossip, starting with my family, the Starks. This is Dark Wings, Dark Words.
Bran Stark is running through the woods when he again encounters the three-eyed crow. His brothers, Jon and Robb, are there telling him to relax as he draws on the bird. He misses and they laugh before disappearing, and he hears his father's voice.
You can't kill it, you know.
Why not?
Because the raven is you.
He awakens in camp with his brother Rickon, their wolves, and servants Hodor and Asha. Asha dismisses his dreams, and they continue on their way. Later in the forest, she hears something and leaves to check. The boy from Bran's dream appears, and Asha puts a spear to his head, but his sister draws a knife on her. Eventually, tensions diffuse, and the siblings introduce themselves as Jojen and Mira Reed. Jojen tells Bran they're both wargs. They shared the earlier dream about the three-eyed raven.
Does it have anything to do with warging?
No, the raven is something different, something deeper. The raven brings the sight.
Seeing things that haven't happened yet.
Jojen then tells Bran that it was the raven's sight that led him to Bran. At Harrenhal, Robb is alone with his wife when he receives bad news. He tells his mother that her father, his grandfather, is dead. On top of that, Winterfell was burned down by the Ironborn, its people slaughtered, Bran and Rickon are missing, and Theon has disappeared. As they march to his grandfather's funeral, Rickard Karstark warns that they don't have the numbers to defeat the Lannisters. Later, Talisa, Robb's wife, sees Catelyn crafting a sort of dream catcher. They're to protect a mother's child. She's made them twice before, once for Bran after his fall, and once for Jon Snow.
Let him live. And I'll love him. And he lived. And I couldn't keep my promise.
Good God, I'm incredibly depressed right now. I think I'll go have lunch in the nearby graveyard just to cheer myself up. Let's check in with little Arya.
As they travel through the forest with Hot Pie, Gendry questions why Arya didn't use her 3 names from Jaqen to kill Joffrey and end the war, for which she has no good explanation. She's worried they're lost when they hear singing, and an arrow almost takes her head off. The men are from the Brotherhood Without Banners. After the archer almost kills Hot Pie, they reluctantly join with the Brotherhood. Later in an inn, Arya and her friends convince the Brotherhood they're no threat, when other soldiers bring in the Hound. He instantly identifies Arya, and she's once again a prisoner.
Protective custody, I assure you. I may be new to the Brotherhood Without Banners, but I know one thing, they are no child kidnappers. Incidentally, the trick with the arrow, I can do that with my sword. What's this? Let's check in with everyone's favourite monkey boy, Theon Greyjoy.
Ooh. Theon awakens tied to a rack in a dark dungeon. A man sticks a dagger into his finger. The soldiers question Theon as to why he overthrew Winterfell, but don't seem very interested in his answers. They stick Theon's foot in a crude wooden vice, slowly crushing it. Later, a young man tells him that his sister sent him to rescue him and loosens the vice, telling Theon he'll come back for him later.
No, you're not going to make me feel sorry for Theon Greyjoy. He did terrible things, and I had to spend far too much time seeing him naked. Let's check in with my alma mater, the Night's Watch.
In the Northern Wastes, Mance Rayder questions Jon Snow's loyalty, promising him death if he betrays them. He united all these warring clans by promising them that death would come for them if they didn't escape the White Walkers. Jon then meets Orell, another warg. Able to see through an animal's eyes, he's using a hawk to scout for the wildling army. Meanwhile, on their march south, Sam is berated by Rast before collapsing. Exhausted, his brothers try to help him up.
Tarly, I forbid you to die. Do you hear me?
Anyway, that's Mormont for you. He once commanded the sun not to rise. We had 3 days of rainy skies. He took credit for it. I'm not saying he actually kept the sun from rising. I'm saying he's a loony. What's been happening with Jaime Lannister?
Jaime and Brienne continue on to King's Landing. He tries to bait her before realizing that she was formerly Renly's servant. He tells her that Renly was gay, but she won't hear it. They pass a merchant, and he tells her to kill him.
He knows who I am.
He doesn't.
Maybe you're right. What if you're not? What if you tell someone?
We're not doing it.
They come to a bridge, and after a feint, Jaime grabs Brienne's sword. They engage in a brief duel, and she manages to beat him down before they're confronted by riders, led to them by the merchant from earlier. They are House Bolton, loyal to Robb Stark, and they captured Jaime and Brienne.
Let that be a lesson to you. You're always safest when you're anonymous. Always murder civilians. Speaking of abusing the population, let's check in with the cast of King's Landing.
Getting fitted for a new suit, Cersei and Joffrey discuss Marjorie. Cersei tries to warn him off her, but he completely ignores her, stating women should know their place. Tyrion comes home to find Shae waiting for him. Concerned about her safety, Shae brings up Littlefinger's recent attention to Sansa. When he mentions knowing Raz, she gets jealous over Tyrion's previous liaison with her, but they can't protect Sansa. She'll have many suitors now that Joffrey is no longer her betrothed. Sansa is convinced that Littlefinger wants nothing from her for smuggling her out of King's Landing when Sir Loras Tyrell arrives, offering to escort her to meet Marjorie and their grandmother, Lady Olenna. Lady Olenna is brazen and openly mocks her son for throwing in with Renly. They have tea, and the lady and Marjorie probe Sansa as to what kind of man Joffrey is. Sansa's carefully built facade momentarily cracks.
He's a monster.
Oh. That's a pity.
Please don't stop the wedding.
Have no fear.
Joffrey later none too subtly interrogates Marjorie on her relationship to the late Renly Baratheon. She plays innocent, claiming she was only his wife and tried to provide him with children, but that there was something wrong with him. Knowing of his homosexuality, Joffrey accepts this.
I've considered making his perversion punishable by death.
Oh, hello, Thaler. I knew your father, Joffrey boy, and he was dead butch. You're not fooling anyone. Oh. And so this episode was very interesting, with much-needed character development and plot advancement. But was it overall entertaining, or did it just waste our time? Let's take a closer look. Damn it, Murray, tell me when the camera's on.
Let's start where we ended, with Marjorie. Once again, she gets a spotlight as we see she's a capable manipulator, playing the dutifully submissive female role perfectly. By the end, her oohs and ahs over Joffrey's weapon have won him over. However, it's essentially the same thing we saw last episode, except far more obvious. I don't think we needed 2 episodes in a row showing she knows how to win people over. This scene could have been better served by waiting an episode or 2. Speaking of the Tyrells, Dame Diana Rigg does a tremendous job. It's not a far cry from her recent turn on Doctor Who, speaking her mind to the point of insulting and alienating all those around her. It's a fun role, but I'm not sure it was a necessary one. So far, Marjorie and Loras have done a perfectly adequate job representing themselves and their family. And while new characters are being introduced, this episode made the mistake of giving screen time to too many characters, something they avoided last episode. But here, Robb Stark gets plot, but not much screen time to explore it. All his scenes are done quickly and dryly. Also, Jon Snow and the Night's Watch are shortchanged on screen time and development. Primarily with Jon, we learn what a warg is, but that could have been more fully covered in Bran's scenes. Also, Tyrion was wasted. He and Shae together are fun, but there's just no point or payoff to this scene. Theon didn't have too much going on, but I suppose it was time that we checked in on him since Winterfell fell. It's the Stark children who really saved this episode. Sansa gave a great performance as we see her carefully crafted exterior finally crack under the pressures of court. She wants to confide in the Tyrells so badly, yet keeping her opinions to herself has been the only thing that's protected her. Arya gets some much-needed plot advancement. The opening bit with Gendry questioning her use of assassination targets, no doubt mirroring the fan base and critics who were wondering the same thing. Her desire to protect her friends and her pride in her swordsmanship, both getting knocked about a bit, also add a bit of humility to the character. Finally, I think it's Bran's scenes who are the most satisfying. The visual tableau of Westeros as he and his party travel through it is great, but we also finally find out what the deal is with his scene through the wolf's eyes, as well as hints as to the nature of the three-eyed crow. The Reed siblings are also great new characters who work well in this dynamic. I couldn't take my eyes off Thomas Reed Sangster, who plays Jojen, and Mira, played by Ellie Kendrick, is equally charismatic. Both draw you in, and Jojen delivers a real sense of gravitas to his warnings to Bran. You really believe that there are strange and mysterious forces guiding them all. One of the best parts of this episode was it finally explored the Catelyn Stark-Jon Snow relationship. We've known from the start that Catelyn didn't like Jon, we just never really got into why she didn't like him. Here we explore her guilt over being unable to love Jon Snow, and blames all the bad things that happened to her family for her own inability to love him. Silly and superstitious we know, but sometimes someone will grab onto an irrational belief and hold on to it no matter what.
And so, while this episode suffered from a few too many characters, it contained some much-needed plot advancement and developed some key characters. I give Dark Wings, Dark Worlds
Do you have running?
3 kingly bitch slaps out of 5. As for today's question, it comes to us from Joe Smith. Great online name there, Joe. He asks, if winter lasts for decades, then how are they able to live through it? Even if they could store enough food for that long, wouldn't most of it rot before they could even get to eat it? Well, that's a good question, Joe. Of course, winter doesn't last for decades. It lasts at the most for a decade, 10 years. But you're quite right, food is scarce. There's meat, of course, but what about the vitamins and minerals you get from vegetables? Well, it's a little-known fact that Westerosi water is extremely nourishing, full of wonderful little nutrients that will keep you alive. What we like to do is take a tiny stick of wood, put it in some water, leave it outside to freeze, and then bring it back in. Yes, it's a little-known fact that the popsicle is a staple of the Westeros diet. If you have a question for me, leave it in the comments section below. I'll pick one to read and answer on next week's show. Until then, friends, I am Lord Stark, and this is Stark Raving!